year. And by then, 3.5 years had gone by, and I don't want to keep dragging the story out, but it drags out.
No, I mean, here's the deal. Like, we're here to hear your stories. And I think
Uh-huh.
part of who you are and part of your story is the fact that you kind of find yourself in these Moby Dick sort of, tales, right? And you're Ahab chasing this. This story involves chasing Dante's Inferno, and it becomes bigger and bigger and longer, and so we're like 3.5 years into it. It keeps getting bigger. Go ahead.
That's funny you say it that way. So then, I lived a lot of years in Hollywood, and I was at a barbecue with friends of mine from the art world, and we were just standing around drinking beer and talking, and we all did different things. And somebody said, we should make a movie sometime. And this was my friend Sean Meredith, who had gone to film school. And we're standing around with this guy, Paul Zaloom. He's been a longtime friend of mine, and he's a puppeteer by profession. He used to have a TV show called Beekman's World.
Oh, sure. I remember
the
Beekman's
90s.
World. Sure.
Yeah, so he's standing there, and he's like, well, I'm only making a movie if we try and do it with puppets. And we all thought that was like the weirdest idea ever. And then we just said, well, maybe we could do it. And they said, well, what should be the story? And I said, well, I'm doing this Dante thing. We could do Dante. And they're like, sure, let's do Dante. And it just started this whole project where we spent 2 years making a feature-length puppet movie of Dante's Inferno.
That's crazy. And so, where
it is crazy.
So I know it's like feature length. Would I find it on Amazon Prime, or is it where I could rent it and see it, or?
You can, if you Google Dante's Inferno 2007, you can find it. You can find trailers from it all around, and I think you can watch it for like $4, maybe on Vimeo. It was on TV for a year on the Arts and Entertainment for the channel. They kept showing it. It went to film festivals all around the world. And then you used to be able to get it in DVD when people had DVDs.
Sure. I mean, I think I saw some stills of it, and it's not like 3D marionette. It was like your drawings had been turned into two-dimensional flat manipulative figures and things, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was, as Paul Zaloom, the expert puppeteer historian, pointed out to us, there's this whole genre called toy theater that's from like the early 1800s, where I guess it started like in Europe when kids would go to the newsstand and get like a magazine and tear out the pages, and there would be stick puppets, and then they had little set pieces and a little like stage they could build, and they could do little Shakespeare plays and things. And so we took that idea and made the whole movie is done with all hand manipulated puppets with zero computer graphics or anything. It's all just popsicle sticks and string and tape and magic markers and things. And it's really good. It's really funny and really political. It's kind of amazing how good it is.
So your ideas, how does it happen? All of your work, when we look backwards, they all look like they're in very neat silos that, here's this concept, here's around a particular guiding question or, a problem or, some social issue. But at the beginning of these processes, it's probably not so neat. How do you stumble upon something that you want to turn into something bigger?
I guess it usually goes back to art history. When I went to art school, I did a year exchange program in Europe at Parsons in Paris and at the Bath Academy of Art in England. And I did my other 3 years at the Otis Art Institute in LA. But the year I spent in Europe was super influential to me to be at the Louvre and at the Tate and looking at all the old master paintings and the French Impressionists and the French Romantic paintings. And so, I really loved art history I've always loved it. So when I have no ideas, I just start going to the library, going to museums and looking at things that I really like, and then they sort of just bleed into the thinking I have about problems going on in the world, and then somehow they blend together.
Some of these, it's just really genius. As we're talking, I'm looking in front of me, I have pictures from your series Prison Nation. These are beautiful landscape paintings just by themselves. Can you describe that series for us?
Sure, and it's a good example in a nutshell of how I work. I had finished some project or another. I was fishing around with not really any idea um, what I was going to work on next, and I frequently am drawn towards like amazing artworks from the past that are sort of overlooked, that aren't part of the main trajectory, the main canon of art history. And so I got really interested in like American landscape painting, the great of um, Thomas Moran and Albert Bierstadt and all those people. And they're just amazing paintings when you see them, and they're not. You don't really learn about them in art school. They're sort of like an aside thing. And so I was interested in them. I started reading about them. I got a big book about American landscape paintings. I was really impressed with the virtuosity of the painting. And I was driving around LA and looking at them in the museums, the examples that we have nearby, which there's many, and reading for a couple of weeks. I was just reading, and it was so interesting how at this one period that the East Coast painters were coming out to the Western territories, and right before photography, and they were painting what became Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon and Yosemite and California and Sierra Nevada, and they're doing these amazing paintings. And then reading about them, it was all about this American view of the West Coast being the Garden of Eden, like American paradise, where you could come to California and dig gold out of the ground and eat oranges off the trees, and it never rained. And so I was immersed in this painting and this thinking, and then I'm driving my car along and just randomly on the radio overheard this conversation where somebody just says, "Oh yeah, California is the most incarcerated people on the planet Earth." And just that sentence just astounded me, that here I'm thinking about 150 years ago, there was almost no one in California. It was considered the Eden of America, and now it's become the most incarcerated population in the world. And I was like thinking, well, what happened in 150 years to go from one to the other? And from that like glimmer of an idea, I thought, I never really think about prisons. I don't know what they look like. Maybe I should go look at one. And then I thought, well, maybe I could do a show where I paint all the prisons in California. And I thought, oh, that's got to be like 8-10 paintings. And from that, I started painting every prison in California and found out there's 33 state prisons, I think 8 federal prisons, and countless county jails and city jails and things. So I set out to paint every state prison in California, and I did, and it took me 3 years.
You were inserting them into these classical landscapes, though, right? Like it's not like you're going out plein air and painting them. I mean, it's like you're imagining them in these pastoral scenes, right?
Well, tragically, no. I actually visited all but 2. I was going to visit them all. I ran out of time because I had a deadline, but I visited all 31 of the 33. And the tragic thing is they actually are in the really beautiful parts of the country, out in the countryside and the foothills and in valleys. And so it's not transplanting them into these beautiful scenes. They're in these beautiful scenes. It was just sort of painting them where they are, but trying to echo these, these traditional landscape grandiose tropes of landscape painting. So yeah, I would do a trip, like I would do a 3-day trip where I'd drive like in a loop and visit like 5 prisons in the desert, and then come home, and I would visit a prison and go take pictures of it and do sketches of it, and maybe go in the parking lot and just see whatever you could see, and then come home with this stuff and do the paintings in the studio.
I feel like nothing you do is on a small scale. Like I'm now looking at in front of me these images of imaginary monument, and these are etchings that are, help me here, they're like 4 feet by 5 feet. Is that
more like, yeah, they're, I think 5 by 7. They're getting bigger.
I mean, they're just it's enormous, and like most people wouldn't dare take on an undertaking of that size, and because it's so many square inches to, like, because it's a fine, laborious process, centimeter by centimeter, right? The self-flagellation, is amazing, because it's beautiful work, It's wry, and
Oh, thank
there's.
you.
How did you get into doing printmaking on such a large scale? Because not that many people do, right?
Yeah. Well, this is thank you for asking because this is a real good lead up to my absolute latest project. But you keep talking about how it's impressive all this amount of physical work that I do, but most of these projects involve other people. Making a movie involved like 50 people. Printing involves a lot of people. Mural making involves people. So I like to collaborate, and when you collaborate, you get more done and more ideas, and it becomes more enjoyable. But uh, most of the print projects I've done started when I was working with this printer named Paul Maloney, who when he first contacted me to work with him, he was working out of Maui in Hawaii. I did the Iraq War prints with him out of a place called the Hui Press in Maui. And since then, he moved to San Francisco for many years, and we did these imaginary monuments. And he's just recently moved to Portland. His whole studio's in Portland now. And right now, we're working on a new one of the series of these monuments. So to back up, I never studied printmaking. I didn't know anything about it. And when he first invited me to come out and work with him, I came up with the idea of doing prints about the war in Iraq. And the original idea was to do a series of little ones, and then him and my wife just said we should do big giant ones, and they ended up being 4 by 8 foot woodblock prints. And Paul Maloney, I mean, he's this amazing master printer. He came out of Crown Point Press in San Francisco. Then he went to Japan for 10 years where he learned all about Japanese printmaking. Then he ended up in Hawaii and in San Francisco and now Portland. But he's the amazing guy. He knows how to do anything, and you just go in there and say, I want to do this, and he figures out how to do it, and he always says yes. So at some point, I wanted to do this big etching, and he figured out how to do it using 6 enormous copper plates in 6 pieces of paper that would all be then glued together into these 6 foot tall etchings. And I think we've done 4 or 5 of those. And we try to do one every 2 years. And right now, just coming up for my next show, we're working on one that's 10 feet tall and 8 feet wide, done on 24 copper plates. So that's the latest thing we're working on.
So what is the theme of that one going to be? Can you say?
It came out. I did it early. The image came around early this year, and came out of this whole Black Lives Matter and this whole discussion of American history and who tells it. And so the idea is that it's a monument to the history of the United States from pre-Columbus days up until now, of the significant events where there's no white people in the whole thing. It's just the history of people of color from pre-Columbia to now. And it's really amazing.
Is that going to look something along the lines of what we see in like American Procession, or does it look more like the imaginary monuments? I mean, is it like are we talking? I'm trying to remember if we're talking about etching or woodblock at this point.
It's etchings.
Okay.
Copper plate etchings, and the image resembles sort of like a grandiose like Arc de Triomphe, like a structure that has like scenes all carved in the sides and different like boxes and things.
So when you do that, how many wind up getting printed?
Not many. The big ones we've done 6 feet are usually edition of 10. We did this American Procession you mentioned. That was a 40-foot long woodblock print. That was edition of 2. So this one we haven't decided. They're still working on doing the artist proof, the first image of it. But I'm imagining it'll be like 10 or less.
It's so labor intensive and so many moving pieces that, we say it's an edition of 10, but each one of them is really its own piece of art. Kind of have to start over from scratch each time. It's not like printing it off of a giant inkjet printer. I mean, there's craftsmanship, with each one, right?
Yeah, they're amazing. Like I was in Portland maybe a month ago to see them working on the early test version of it, and each plate is like 2 by 3 feet, and it's all etched, and then they put the ink on it and they wipe it by hand, and then they do a print of it on this Japanese gampi paper, and it takes a team of 3 people to do it. and they try to do